And start sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it, Hardit.
Perfect. Okay, so, well, since I was going to demo things about Power Apps, I thought I will create the presentation in Power Apps. So no PPT for me. We will stick within the app for the slides as well as the content. Before we get started, just want to say I'm super excited to be a part of this event. One of my favorite cities in the world, if not the favorite. Obviously, would have been awesome if this could have been an in-person event, but hopefully next year. So, but yeah, thanks to Phil, I don't think I feel I'm missing out on a lot because I have that super cool app that he demoed this morning. So if any one of you is feeling the pain of not being in New York City, just go download Phil's app and feel as if you are in the city. So with that said, I am going to run the app in the editor and not in the play mode because I have to switch between a couple of screens here and there. And it's just easy because I also want to show a couple of properties within the studio. So instead of navigating between tabs, I just want to keep the app in one tab and then switch between the play mode and the edit mode. Okay, with that said, let's get started. So this is the session today, A to Z, 26 Power Apps tips. Basically, what I've done is I've tried to come up with 26 tips. Each one starts with an alphabet, and that's how they are arranged. They are sorted in. They are sorted alphabetically, so no particular order of complexity or skill level or the process of creating an app. It's purely based on alphabets. Um, Moving on, a little bit about me. I'm a senior manager slash architect at Hitachi Solutions. I do have the pleasure of working with Andrew Butenko, who we just saw impressing all of us with PCF controls. I am a business applications MVP. Here are some of the details if you want to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or if you want to go read my blog. Also, the communities that Andrew was talking about at the end of his demo. If you go to the Power Apps community, you will find me there, and my profile name there is Power Addict, and I'm a community super user as well. And like everyone has been saying until now, if you go to one of those communities, you will get your questions answered very quickly. So strongly suggest to go there and post your questions. Even if you think it's a simple question, there will be people who will jump on those questions and give you answers and even give you slightly more knowledge about what you might run into in the future. So strongly suggest go there, use that resource. And obviously it's free. So what's the agenda for today? Nothing. We're just going to get into it, navigate from one alphabet to another, get into the tip, the use case, and how it will help you create better apps. So starting off with the first one, at with alphabet A. So the two controls that I want to talk about here are add picture control and camera. These are basically two ways you can have users add pictures to an app. The camera control is a pretty straightforward traditional control, and the add picture control is slightly different. So how do those two work and which one is better and why? So if I go to the next screen, it's going to ask me to allow use of the camera, which I will. So we have a camera control on the left hand side and we have the add picture control on the right hand side. So the main difference between the two is if you open this control, or if you click on this control, it basically takes you to the camera where you can click pictures. Works awesome, looks pretty neat. But then on the other side, when you click on an add picture control on a mobile device, you get two options. One is to use a camera, and the second is to pick an existing image from your gallery. Here on the desktop, of course, if I click here, it asks me to select a picture from my device. And if I pick something, let's say this one, and say open, it uploads the picture, and then the text changes to change picture because it already has one. So the reason why I would pick add picture control over camera control is because you, in most cases, will not get full resolution when you use the camera control. So if you ever have a need of adding pictures through your app, definitely suggest picking the add picture control, because it not only ensures full resolution pictures, but it also lets users pick images from their gallery. So with that said, I'm going to move on to the next one. Not sure if I have my camera on, but I will turn it on now that I've used the camera control. Okay. Next is alphabet B, background image. So if you have a screen, there are a couple of ways you can add a picture to it, right? In either case, you first have to upload it. How do you do that? You go to media, then you click on upload and select the picture that you want to upload to the app, and then it gets added to the app resources. Then if you want to add it to the screen, couple of ways you can do it depending on what your use case is. So say if I want to add this welcome picture, and if I want to reposition it somewhere and I want to size it up in a different way, I can simply drag and drop it, stretch it. But like you saw on the first slide, I had this picture cover the entire screen. So instead of adding it to the canvas, then resizing it and repositioning it, and then possibly have someone, I don't know, add another control on top of it, or behind it, which will be worse. What you can do is I'm going to delete this picture. I'm going to select this screen, go here and say background image, and select that same welcome image. Now this image is like the base or the background of the screen, and you can add any controls on top of it. If you move certain controls, you don't run into the possibility of dragging the image or resizing the image. So this is a slightly better way of adding an image that you want to act as a background to your canvas. With that said, I'm going to change this screen back to where it doesn't have a background, and we will move on to the next one. This is one of the cool comparisons that I love making in Canvas apps, combo box versus dropdown. It's always fun when you have two controls that are very similar to each other, but they're not. So how does a combo box compare to a dropdown? So if I move on to the next screen, I have a drop down on the left hand side. I have a combo box on the right hand side. So couple of things that stand out right away, right? First is I have a value selected in the drop down. I have no value selected in the combo box. What does that mean? You can have a blank default in a combo box, but not in a drop down. And I used to love this difference until recently when the Power Apps team added a new property to the drop down control where you can actually say, hey, I don't want any default property selected. So that difference, that advantage of combo box over drop down is out of the window now. But that being said, there are still more advantages for a combo box versus a drop down. So if I click on a drop down, I can click on one value. If I click on a combo box, I can click on a value, I can click on another value, and I can keep doing that. So I can select multiple items using a combo box, and I cannot do that with the dropdown. One more advantage in a combo box is, say if the list of options or the list of items in a dropdown or a combo box is large, I don't know, maybe like 50. You cannot expect the users to scroll through all 50 of them. So combo boxes provide an easy way where someone can just come in, type in, and search those items. And then if they find the one that they're looking for, they can simply click on it. And you might say that these properties are cool, but what if I don't want these properties? Would I then use a dropdown? Personally, I would say no, because if you select a combo box, you actually can turn these properties off, right? So if you don't want to allow searching, you can turn it off. If you don't want to allow multiple selection, you can turn that off as well. And if you do that, then your combo box becomes a drop down. So you can make a combo box work like a drop down, but you cannot make a drop down work like a combo box. So With that said, we will move on to the next tip, D for delegation. So delegation is a very important concept in Power Apps, which is very easy to ignore or skip, especially when you're getting started with Power Apps. So what does delegation mean? Power Apps tries to delegate functions or expressions or calculations to the data source. For example, if you want to filter a list of accounts, it will try to put the filter or the weight of that filter expression to the data source so that only the filtered list of records is returned to the app. Um, in some cases, that is not possible, and each data source has its own limitation. But let's say when an expression or a function is not delegable, what happens in that case is that the entire list of records is returned to Power Apps, and then the operation, like filter in our example, is done locally, which is obviously resource heavy, can affect performance, and so on and so forth. So what you should try to do always is to have expressions that are delegable. And without going into a lot of details about which functions are delegable, which ones are not, for which data source, the tip here is an easy way to test it depends on one setting. So when we say the number of records is limited that are returned to Power Apps, what do we mean by that is, let's say the non-delegation limit is set to 500, which is the default value. What that means is if I'm trying to filter on, say, an accounts entity or an accounts table, um, and my expression is not delegable, I will only get the first 500 records from the data source. So if I'm trying to do a lookup on an account that happens to be or happens not to be in the first 500, the lookup will come out blank, and I will think that this particular account that I'm trying to look for doesn't exist, which is obviously incorrect. So how do you get to that delegation limit? If you click on files and you click on settings and you click on advanced settings, this is where you have the default value of 500. You can change this to a maximum of 2000, but I would strongly suggest not doing that because of potential performance impact. So ideally, your goal should be to have expressions that are delegable. Now, in your test data or in your dev instance, you may not have enough number of records to actually help you test whether your expressions are delegable or not. So the easiest way to test it is change this 500 to 1. Now, when you save your app and check your galleries or filter expressions and see the number of records that are returned, if you are expecting more than one and you only see one, you can now be sure that your expression is not delegable and you need to work on it. And obviously, if you see more than one, you can be 100% sure that your functions are all good from a delegation perspective, and then you can move on. So quick tip, change 500 to 1, save it, and then you should be able to test out your app for delegation issues pretty easily. Next one is another one of those cool comparisons, edit form versus display form. So if you want to add a form to your app, there are two forms or two types of forms, edit and display. So if I go to the next screen, I have a display form on the left hand side and an edit form on the right hand side. Display forms are cool if you just want to display information or view information, but that is almost never the case. You won't limit your app to only show data. You might want to create new records, or you might want to view records and edit existing records. So the reason that edit forms are better than display forms is because they have this property. So if I click on this form here, which is this form, there is a property called mode, and there are three values, edit, new, and view. And with the help of a click, you can switch the mode of the form. So here I have a form which is in the edit mode, and it is allowing me to edit information for the same record. If I want to change this to a view form to look exactly like the display form, I can click on this view form button and it becomes exactly the same. If I want to use the same form to create a new record, I can click on new form and it blanks out the fields and lets me type in. And then if I go back to edit form, goes back to the original state. Now, what are all these buttons doing? They're literally calling just one function in each case. In this one, it is new form, form name, and then view form, form name, and then edit form, form name. So once again, just like how combo boxes can be made to work like drop downs, you can have an edit form work like a display form, but not the other way around. And these edit forms help you in controlling the number of controls you add to your app. So strongly suggest using an edit form over a display form, and then switch the mode as per your need, on the basis of either the specific button that the user might click or the specific icon that the user might click to change the mode of the form. Next one is formulas. The reason I included that here is because we think of Power Apps as a low code, no code platform, which it is. So we don't expect it to have a lot of functions or formulas, but it's actually the other way around, right? To make your life easier, it gives you a very rich resource of formulas or expressions. Um, how many formulas exist in Power Apps? It's actually 173, I guess, maybe off by one or two. How do I know that number? I created an app a few days ago, which is the Power Apps formula reference. It allows users to interact with each expression and see, with typing in their own data, how each function does what it's supposed to do on the data that they entered. And we will see a preview of that in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to skip the example for this particular tip for a second and then come back to it later. Moving on to the next one, gallery versus data table. Not as strong a comparison as combo box versus dropdown or edit form versus display form, but still a competition nonetheless. So if I go to the next screen, galleries and data tables both are types of controls that you can use to display lists of data. So some of the advantages of gallery are you can do a lot of customization. You can have a vertical gallery. You can have a horizontal gallery. You can add other types of controls inside a gallery. I can actually come in here and say, add a date picker control, right? So I can do lots of things with galleries that I cannot with a data table. But if we look at the other way around, data tables come with headers built in. In galleries, if I want to add headers, I'll probably have to add either labels or buttons outside of the gallery. And data tables can allow horizontal scroll. So if the columns can auto expand based on data. And if that happens, there will be a horizontal scroll bar that allows you to navigate the entire row, which again can be cool, can be not so cool, depending on what your use case is. Another advantage of gallery over data table is you can actually select multiple records. So let's say I delete this date picker, and just for the sake of this example, I can add a checkbox here. And if I play the app, I can select multiple records and then do whatever I want to with those records, which is not possible in data table. So pretty limited in terms of customization. But if you don't want to do any of these fancy things, a data table is actually a pretty good start with headers that stretch automatically. So moving on to the next one is hyperlinks. And this is where we will, go back to the example for the formula tip. So you can use hyperlinks, or you can launch certain web pages or apps using the launch function. And you have two different options with the launch function. One is, or two different values for the launch target. And by that, what I mean is you can either open the web page or an app in the same tab as the existing app, or you can open it in a different tab. So if I go to the next screen, I have a couple of examples here. First one is to launch a web page, which is the Power Apps formula reference. And I'm saying launch it in a new tab. So if I click it here, it opens the formula reference Microsoft Doc in a new tab. If I click on the other link, which I'll do in this window because I have to come back, and since the other link is going to demonstrate the fact that you can open things in the same tab, I didn't want to do it in that tab. So if I come back here, Now what I'm saying is launch another app. So this URL that you see is the URL of my Power Apps formula reference app. And I'm saying the launch target is replace. So if I click on this, it's going to open this app in the same window. So if I click here, I go out of that app, it opens another app, and then that app is my Power Apps formula reference, and I can now start using this app. So if any one of you has used the emergency response solution from Microsoft, it actually uses this launch function to launch multiple apps from within the same app. So pretty strong functionality. Strongly suggest trying it out if you have any use cases for launching either web pages or other Power Apps from another app. So I'm going to go back to my app and then move on to the next one. Icons. Power Apps has a pretty decent collection of icons that are available out of the box. So here is the entire list. Now, of course, there will be times when these may not meet your needs, but when they do, strongly suggest using them. And going back to that same notion of reusing controls as much as possible, one example that I want to share with you guys is, let's say we have a gallery, and when you have a gallery, you typically want to allow users to sort by the different columns that are available, and then also allow them to switch the sort order from ascending to descending and then back to ascending. So typically what would happen is you would add a gallery, you would add buttons, and then you would add icons for each button, a down arrow and an up arrow. So say if there are 10 headers, that's 20 icons for a gallery. Now, the reason why we wouldn't need 20 is if I go to the next screen, let's say this is my up arrow denoting ascending, descending, ascending order. If I click on this button, it's going to switch to a descending order button. Now, how did I do that? It's pretty simple. I am setting a variable and I'm toggling its value from true to false. And then if I go to the icon and I go to its rotation property, I'm saying if that variable is false, keep the rotation to 0. If it's true, keep it to 180 or flip it. So uh, just by using this one expression, you can bring the number of icons in this example, at least, down from 20 to 10. If you want to bring it down further to 1, all you need to do is make its X position also relative based on the button that is being clicked on. So it'll simply be something like if variable 1, which is being set on the first button's click, is true, set the X position to, let's say, 100. If the variable 2 is true, set it to 200, and so on and so forth. So just by using these two expressions, you can bring down the number of controls from 20 down to 1. So moving on to the next one, Jumpstart, because Power Apps is supposed to be a platform that should allow you to create apps quickly. And how can you speed up that process is pretty simple. So going back to Andrew's presentation about PCF controls, right? There is something similar, not exactly. And I say it's similar because it is also a reusable control. We call it components. And what you can do is you can create a component that you can share not only within your app on multiple screens, but you can actually share it across apps. So to give you an example of one that I created just for this app, if I click on the screen. So if, as you can see here, it's a pretty standard, pretty basic canvas that I have. I added 3 labels, one for the alphabet, one for first point or detail about the tip, and second for the second detail. And then I also have a footer here that has some basic information that I want on every screen. If I go to the components tab here next to screens, you can see I have a few components. This is the one that we were talking about. This is literally nothing but a screen, like a screen that you would have added in your app directly. But instead of that, you created a screen here or a component. You added the controls that you want, like a label at the bottom, a text label here, another text label here, and another text label here. And what you can do, of course, if this information is static, you can simply set the values. But in this case, and in most cases, your values will not be static, which is why you're probably creating a component. So what you need to do is, again, without going into a lot of details about how to create components, is you can select a component and say, I want to add a custom property. So I have three simple ones. One is header text, header font size, and then point one and point two. Now, when I go to a screen, so like if I go to the previous screen, I have the component here, and the properties that I've provided are J, 48, which is my font size, and then point one is jumpstart, point two is components. So strongly suggest checking out components, creating them so that, especially when you're building enterprise applications, you would want consistency, not only in behavior, but also from a UI perspective. And if every app maker has to create something like a header or a footer, there will end up being inconsistencies in UI, which will just not add a good professional look and feel to your enterprise applications. So you can create a component, and if you go to make.powerapps.com and you click on apps, this is where most of us, do our work. But then if you haven't noticed, there is a tab here that says component libraries, and you can actually come here and create a component library instead of creating a component within the app, because creating one here allows any user in this tenant, in this environment, to access that component. And not only just that, as and when you make updates to the component in the library, they get those updates as well. So if you make a component within your app, and even if you export it and import it in another app, if you make updates here, those updates will not make their way through to the other app. So, and to enable all of that, if you go to settings, advanced settings, I believe there is, yep, there is one preview feature here that says components. So in case you don't see the components tab within your app, just toggle this to on and you should be good to go. Okay. Next is keyboard mode. So this one is applicable more for mobile applications. If you have used any native phone apps where you have had to, type in some text, depending on the number field, depending on the data type of the text that you want to type in, um, you see different keyboards. For example, if there is a field in which you need to type in your phone number, you see a numeric keypad. Whereas if there is a field in which you want to type in your name, you see a full keyboard. So how do you control that? If I go to the next screen, there is a property called virtual keyboard mode, and there are three different values: text, numeric, and auto. If you type in text, the keyboard that will show up on your mobile device will be the full keyboard. If you type in numeric, you will only see the number keypad show up. And then in auto, depending on what the data type of the field is, the appropriate keyboard will show up. In addition to that, since that doesn't apply to desktop apps, you also have, if I go back to this text input control, you also have a format field. The two options you have is text and number. So now what happens is, for this one, I've set it to text. For this one, I've set it to number. So if I click on the text one, I can type in numbers and text. If I click on the number one and I try to start typing text, this is what happens. But if I start typing in numbers, it's pretty cool. It's okay with it. Keep in mind, though, it lets you type in percentage symbol, which might be okay for you. But if you are trying to fetch the value of this text input control and trying to update a field that is numeric, it may or may not like the percentage symbol. So if that happens to be the case, suggest you to strip off the percentage or not allow that to be typed in, which is not an out of the box property, but can be achieved pretty easily. So to wrap this one up, a virtual keyboard mode is a pretty cool property for your mobile apps. If you select your text input control, it's actually not there in this properties tab. If you go to advanced, it's kind of hidden. But if you go to the properties tab here, it's down below, and you can set it to text or a numeric or auto. So with that one, let's move on to the next. Last submit. So in Power Apps, forms is a very strong control, right? Because at the end of the day, you will be either displaying information or editing information or creating new information. And for all of that, like we saw a few minutes ago, you can use an edit form. Now, there are a couple of ways of submitting the information using a form. One is a pretty simple submit form function. Second is patch. Again, each has its own advantages and disadvantages, but without going into a lot of details, let's say you're using submit form because you're getting started with Power Apps. You want to keep it simple. You don't want to get into the complexity of patch, which is what most people would do, and I did the same. So if that happens to be the case, and let's say you are submitting the form to create a new record, but you want to know some details of that newly created record. For example, what was the ID that was assigned to that new record? Because I might want to show that information to the end user when they are submitting a record or creating a new record. So there are a couple of different ways you can do that, but the neatest one that you can use is the one that I'm going to show you right now, which is I have a form here. It doesn't look like a form because it only has one field. But then I have a button, and the on select of this button is doing a couple of things here. One is submit form. Form 2 is the name of this form, which is creating a record. And then I'm saying set this variable with form2.last submit, which basically means it is going to fetch the newly created record and store it in this variable. The reason why that is cool is because I cannot always expect to fetch the latest record, right? By like, I don't know, like filtering by created on date, because someone else, some other user might be using this app and maybe his record was created after mine. So if I try to filter and fetch the latest created record, that might be someone else's record. This ensures that you will get the most recently created record using this form in your app. Now, when that happens, I can then use this record to get any details of that particular record, or use this variable to get any details of those records. So if I click here and say this is the confirmation that I want to show, and I probably missed a required field here, which is title. So if I add and say my name and I do this, and then the submit form creates the new record, fetches the latest record, stores it in a variable, and then all I'm doing here is record ID, which is form2.last submit, and that's all I'm using to display the information. So if you're using submit form, if you want to get the latest record that was created, and because you want to show some details, use the form.last submit to fetch that record. Okay. Media controls. So you can have, say, videos playing in your app. There is a standard video control. If I go back here, if you go to insert and then media, you have the option to add a video control. Um, Video controls have a property. I'm going to add one here real quick and then move on to the next one where I have an example. So the couple of properties that I want to talk about today are auto start and show controls. So I'm going to delete this for now, go to the next screen and see what happens. I have two video controls on the next screen. The one on the left has auto start set to true. So let's see what happens. It starts playing automatically as the user comes to the screen, which again, in some cases might be good, but in most cases it will not, because you don't want the users to be thrown off by coming to a screen and then suddenly seeing a video play, unless of course that is the only reason why they are coming to the screen. So by setting the auto start to false, I now have the control of when I want to start the video versus just simply having the video, you know, show up on the screen and start playing. So that's one. This one has auto start set to true. This one has auto start set to false. With that said, there is the other property that I want to talk about is show controls. As you can see here, I see a lot of controls here. The current time, the total time, the volume control, the full screen control. the start, stop, pause control. I don't see any of these here. I have the show control property set to false. What happens is if I click on the video begins. If I click on the video again, it pauses. So I definitely do have the ability to start, pause, or stop a video. But A, it's not intuitive because you have to click on the video control and you may not always know that information. And B, you lose out on controls like changing this into a full screen or controlling the volume or just checking out how long the video is and what current point I am on in that video. So suggested properties for a video control or a media control are set the auto start to false, set the show controls property to true. So new screens, going back to that same notion of speeding up your process of creating Power Apps, there are a lot of screen templates that are available. And they differ for the phone layout versus the tablet layout. So if you come here to the Insert tab and New Screen, you click on this arrow, you see a good set of template screens. Scrollable screen is basically a screen that has an infinite scroll, so to speak. So something that you're used to seeing on your phones, right? When you open your Outlook app, the screen size is limited because that's based on your phone. But as you scroll through your inbox, you can just continue to scroll as long as you are able to see your emails or depending on the number of emails you have. So that's what you can get with the scrollable screen. List screen is basically, if you were anyways going to create a new screen and then add a gallery to it, you would rather just come here and say, I want to add a list screen. Similarly, there are other fields where other screens where you can get a jump start on your app making experience and then focus on some of the other things rather than building things from scratch. So strongly suggest checking these templates out. And it not only applies to screens, but if you go to make.powerapps.com and you click on, I think if you go to the create tab, there are a lot of templates that are available, which are awesome. And in one of my projects, we just happened to demo one of these template apps, and the customer liked the UI so much that they wanted the exact same thing, which was awesome because then we only had to make minimal changes like changing the data source, of course, to the one that the customer was using, and then changing the fields and stuff. But if I had to create one of these templates from scratch, it would have obviously added a significant amount of time to the build process. So check out those templates, check out these screen templates, and it should speed up your process significantly. Next one is the Onstart property. This goes back to what Phil was showing at the beginning of the event today. If you go to app and you go to the Onstart property, you can declare certain things like a collection or a variable that you want to use throughout the app. If you type in a new expression, it's not going to show up in your app right away because the app Onstart hasn't run. But if you want to force that, you can click on these three dots and say run Onstart, and then you will start seeing the changes or the additions that you made in your app. And when you're playing a published app on start runs when you run the app when you run the app, this is the first thing that happens. And then anything that you declare or anything that you define in the app on start is then available for the rest of the app. So this one goes back to the camera control. It's pretty cool because if I add a camera control here real quick, one thing that you will see is there is this property called camera and it is set to 0. What that is each camera has an ID assigned to it. Now, in most cases, 0 will be the camera that you want to use. But say on an Android phone versus an Apple iPhone, those IDs are potentially different. So you want to give your users the complete control over which camera they want to use. Maybe they want to click a selfie. Maybe they don't want to click a selfie. Or in this case, on my laptop, I believe if I stop sharing my video here and then go back now to the app, shows me the list of options or the list of cameras I have. So I have this webcam. I have my surface camera front, which I selected just now. I have my surface camera rear, which shows a book that's behind my surface. So I now have the option to select the camera I want to use. And that's the experience you want to give to your users, where they can select the camera that they want to use. And they not only see the IDs, but they also see the names. And for some people, of course, it might be easier to identify the camera using the name. And I didn't have to specify these camera names. These are all fetched. And how? If I click here, the gallery source is camera one is this particular control's name. And all it's doing here is camera one dot available devices. Another cool tip here now that we are in the formula bar, whenever you have a table or a list of records in an expression, you will see this down arrow. If you click on it, you can actually get a preview of those records right here. So it's a pretty cool way to look at some of the data that you might expect to show and make sure that all the records that you want to see are actually in the table that you're trying to use. OK, so with that said, let's move on to the next one. And I'm going to go back here. And
Hardit, you have 10 minutes left.
yes. So quotation marks are pretty straightforward. In some cases, this throws off a lot of developers. Single quotes versus double quotes. Double quotes basically are used for text, and single quotes are used for identifiers that either have a space or a special character in them. So pretty straightforward. Reset function is pretty cool. What it does is it brings any control to its default property. To give you an example, I have a couple of galleries here. Now, by default, a gallery has its first record selected. So if I click any other record and I click on the reset function, the first one gets selected by default. This may not be the ideal behavior because you may not want any record to be selected by default. So in this gallery, when I select any other record and I click on reset, you will see that no record gets selected. That's because the default property of this gallery is set to curly brackets, which is basically telling it that I want nothing. I want a blank record to be the default one. So use the reset function to bring any of your controls back to its original state. Save your apps, save and publish. Huge thing, sounds simple, but as you saw in Phil's demo, the first thing he did was he entered a name and saved his app, which is very important because if you keep on working on your app, you might lose your work until you save it at least once. And once you do that, then if you go to your file and account, you can make sure that this property is set to true, which basically says that your app will be automatically saved every 2 minutes. So next is tables. Pretty cool way to create temporary tables within your app. So not in every case you will have a database table that you can use to create, say, a gallery or a dropdown. So for example, this is a pretty simple gallery of say filtering that I might want to use to filter another gallery based on these status values. How did I create this? It's pretty simple. I created a temporary table and then provided the different text values in here. So you can either use this or use the table function to create local tables within your app. User function, pretty neat. It's available in your apps. If you use that function, you can get some basic information about the current logged in user. And the three pieces of information that are available are name, image, and email. So if you do user.email, you get the email of the current logged in user, the name, and then the image as well. And one other tip here is the image that is added by default. So if I come in here and I say image and I say user.image, it is square, and which may not be the best look. So if you want to turn this into a circle, depending on what the width and height of that image is, so if it's say 155 or 150, all you need to do is make sure you go to the advanced properties, you go to the radius, should be somewhere here, radius bottom right, left, top right, top left, and change it to a value that's as close to the width and height as possible. So like in this case, the width and height is 248, 248, and the radius values are set to 200, which is what makes it a circle as long as all the radius values are the same. So moving on to the last few, variables like in any language are pretty important. One thing to keep in mind is there are two types of variables, global and context. If you want a variable to be available throughout your app, use a global variable. If you want a variable that you just need, say, for one screen, you can use a local or context variable. Now, you can declare or define a global variable using the set function. I click here, and then this text now, this variable now is available for me throughout the app. Declaring a local variable is slightly different. You can use the update context function, and then once you do that, this variable is only available on this screen in most cases. When I say most cases, it's because I can decide to pass on this local variable to another screen in the navigate function if I want to, but that's an extra step, and that only works one screen at a time, right? So if you really want a variable throughout your app, declare a global variable. Wrap count is, say if you have a gallery control, most of us don't move beyond adding a gallery control and adding more labels within the gallery. But one property that gets missed is wrap count, which is available for both a horizontal gallery and a vertical gallery. What it does is for a vertical gallery, it defines the number of records in each row. So if I change this to 2, it changes this way. If I change this to 3, if I change this to 4, it becomes like this. And similarly, for a horizontal gallery, it changes the number of records in a column. So pretty useful property if you want to save on some real estate. So go check out the wrap count property for a gallery. And then X and Y are pretty straightforward. They denote the position of each control. In most cases, you will have static values. But for things like adding responsiveness to your app, you can have relative expressions for the X and Y values of each control. And you can base it off of another control, which will then allow movement or automatic movement of controls as say when the screen size changes. So use expressions for X and Y positions to add responsiveness to your apps. Of course, there are more steps that you would need to, but this is a critical piece of adding responsiveness. Lastly, I was struggling to find some cool tip with Z. I didn't. But there's no formula that starts with Z. There is no property that starts with Z. So the only thing I could find was there is an acceleration signal that is available, and that has three values: acceleration.x, .y, and .z. And what acceleration is, it's basically a signal that is available. So if you go to your mobile device and run this app, you can use the signals that are available on your phone. And those three are location, compass, and acceleration. If I go to the next screen, so you can answer questions like, where am I right now? This happens to be my current lat long. Where am I headed? Well, if I would have been on my phone, it would have shown the direction in which I was heading. And how fast am I? I would have also seen values for acceleration on a mobile device. So if you save this app, run it on your phone, you will see these values show up. Questions?
Hey, Hardit.
Yes.
Hi, this is Michelle here. I have a few questions. Going back, I kind of put them in the chat.
Okay.
So at the point where you said you could launch either, the app in the same tab or a new tab, can you also launch a new window? Is that an option?
Not that I know of.
Okay. With the videos, with the auto start, is that the same? Well, I don't even know. Can you embed a YouTube video? And if you do,
Yes.
will it translate to autoplay equals 1 if it's true?
Yeah. So if say I go to YouTube and I don't know, I pick whatever first random video that shows up. Say if I select this guy, I don't want to play it. And if
So
I,
pass it.
yeah,
Can you?
so all you need to do is go to your video control, set its media property to that, I think it's that URL. And now it just starts playing that video because the auto start is not true, but this is where you get the option to play a YouTube video right within your app. And I believe if I click on that, if I click on that header, that tab, it takes you to YouTube and then you can watch the video there.
Right, because usually when you want to play, when it might be a clip, it might not be the whole thing, so you need to use start and end and all kinds of different things that you pass to YouTube.
Yes. So you can, what I would do in that case is you can use the launch function. And the reason I say that is because if I go to this launch example, which was hyperlink, so it was H. This second parameter that you see here, which is blank, you can actually pass in values, right? So if you go to a YouTube URL and figure out, or if you know what values you need to pass to bring the video to a particular start point, you can get the syntax of that particular parameter and put it here and give it a value so that when someone clicks on it, it actually passes all that information to the URL, and then whatever the target application is supposed to do with those values, it'll do that.
Okay, great. Have to try it because it's been problematic.
Would love to help if you run into issues.
Thanks. Well, it was actually from within a PowerPoint, so not from this. Okay. Let's see. So now let's see. Okay. With regard to, you started mentioning the X and the Y at the end with the X, but are the screens, when you do the templates, are they responsive, and are there like pre-coded sizes, like, small, large, very large, that kind of thing?
For screen sizes?
Yeah, when you use a template, like you might have to rearrange the template depending on what you're displaying on,
Mm-hmm. So if you add a new screen, let's say, I don't believe those templates are responsive. Some parts of it are. I don't think those are completely responsive though. So for example, if I look at something as simple as this header, right? In this case, the width it says parent.width, which is a very easy way to reference the parent control, which in this case is the screen itself. The reason why, in spite of this will not be responsive is if I click on the screen itself and I go to the height of the screen, it says app.height and app.minimum screen height, which is slightly responsive because this is 320 and this is 768. So you will get a little bit of responsiveness both in terms of height and width right here, because I think this would also be less than the I think it is also set to 320, and this of course is 1366. So yes, to answer your question, some parts of it will be responsive, maybe not to the extent that you want them to be, because these minimum widths and heights may not be good enough for you. You either may want a bigger minimum value or a smaller minimum value, depending on the device that the user will be using or the browser window size that the user will be using. But you definitely get a little bit of a jump start by having certain controls reference the parent control, which is basically like the most fundamental concept in responsiveness, that is to base your properties, not just X and Y, right? Even width and height based on something else like the parent control in this case for this label, which is screen. And just one more point there, if you really want to make something responsive, strongly suggest going to advanced settings and enabling the container property, which I believe is, thought it was a preview feature, maybe not. It's probably then an experiment right here, container control. What it does is it allows you to group controls within containers. So for example, I might want this header and this search to be grouped together. So I can put them in one container, and then when I do parent, it will reference that container. And it's easier for me to make one container responsive than three different controls here, which is the header, the search bar, and the icon. So if you haven't tried out containers, strongly suggest you do. It will make your life super easy when it comes to making your app responsive.
And a follow-on question to that, if you're handing off this app from one device to another, how do you suggest to handle that in coding?
You mean how do I share this app with others, or how do I
No.
like?
No, like say you start the app on Edge and you decide to finish on your phone, or vice versa. You start the app on your phone and you go to Edge. The app is being handed off. Or like with an iPhone, you start the app on the iPhone and then you hand it off to the Mac, whatever.
So when you say start the app on your phone, are you referring to using the app on a phone versus?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay. So just to make sure I understood the question right, are you saying how do I reference or how do I figure out in the app which device I'm on?
Well, that's what I'm asking, whether you should do that inside the app or whether you should actually have different apps. What's the best practice?
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So depends, right? It currently based on how much effort you have to put in to make an app responsive. It kind of sort of is a trade-off. If the amount of effort to make an app completely responsive is a lot, you might be better off creating two separate apps. However, that being said, a very simple tablet layout app, even if I open this app right now with absolutely zero responsiveness added to it, at least to the screens that I created, this app will still work perfectly fine on a phone. It's just that it'll be in the landscape mode versus portrait. And if that is a deal breaker, one simple thing that you can do, right, is you can just come here, go to screen size and orientation, and say, don't lock the aspect ratio or don't lock the orientation. Would it give you the perfect experience? Maybe not, but it'll at least take you a step further to at least be in a position to evaluate, is this painful enough to warrant the effort that needs to be put in to create an app that is completely responsive? If not, then maybe just either use this app as is on both devices or create separate ones. Because in some cases, right, that I've worked, even the functionality that is needed is not the same to a certain extent on on different devices. Like I might want to view more details if possible on a desktop app versus on a phone app. So if there are things like that, based on the current limitations, I don't want to call it limitations, but the current method of making an app responsive, it's kind of a trade-off. So kind of sort of depends on that, on the particular app that you're trying to make responsive.
Yeah, thanks, Hardit. We have the next session. It's already 5 minutes over, I guess. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
So guys, our next speaker is Michael Oakes. He's going to talk to us about streamlining implementations with virtual entities. Mike, the floor is yours.
All right. Can you guys hear me and see me?
Yep, we can hear and see you. Yep.
Good. All right.
One second, Michael.
Okay.